Hello, everyone. I want to thank the International Narcotics Control Board and the Vienna NGO Committee for inviting me to testify today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. My name is Kevin Sabet, and I am the president of SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I'm also a former senior advisor in 3 U.S. presidential administrations. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of multiple organizations in the Drug Policy Futures Network, including SAM, to talk about the various issues with regards to marijuana. Marijuana is a topic of heated debate and discussion, and what SAM tries to discuss is how we do not need a false dichotomy when discussing cannabis policy. There does not need to be a false debate between legalization or regulation on one side and criminalization on the other. Now, I and my colleagues at SAM, who comprise scientific research institutions all over the world, are very concerned about some member states' legalization of cannabis. We feel these actions violate the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961 and threaten international cooperation concerning drug abuse and trafficking. We ask the INCB to refer to the newly published WHO report on cannabis. This document is the result of dozens of experts from around the world and clearly outlines the various scientific issues with regards to cannabis use. We also remind state parties, and we think the INCB should remind state parties, about the health and societal impacts of non-medical drug use as described by WHO. Some of these issues they bring up, including the fact that young people often use cannabis, especially in developed nations, and they often first use it in their mid-teens. It's often the first drug or the first of maybe one or two other drugs that are used before other psychoactive substances. Growing evidence reveals that regular heavy cannabis use during adolescence is associated with more severe and persistent negative consequences than use during adulthood. Regular cannabis use can develop dependence on the drug, and the risk may be about 1 in 10 who ever try cannabis, but 1 in 6 among adolescent users and 1 in 3 among daily users. In the U.S., there has been a concerning upward trend of daily heavy use of marijuana. There's also been an upward trend in the THC content of confiscated cannabis around the world. Now, there is not enough knowledge as to whether or not cannabis products with higher THC content affect the adverse health of the global population, because a lot of research has not been done on things like 99% THC waxes or on these very high THC edibles. The WHO also talked about a consistent dose-response relationship between cannabis use in adolescence and the risk of developing psychotic symptoms such as schizophrenia. We also know that a substantial majority of citizens around the world do not agree with legalizing cannabis. We found in the US that legalization is really about one thing and one thing only, and that's making a small number of business people very rich. If it were about ending the war on drugs or criminalization, we know that countries, and certainly U.S. states, can work within the UN conventions to remove criminal penalties. Indeed, the UN conventions do not demand criminalization. And these changes we've seen in the U.S. would really be limited to decriminalization if it wasn't about the business interests. But instead, a host of these interests are getting involved in legal cannabis, not just in Colorado, but really around the world. They have set up private equity firms and funding organizations, fundraising to attract investors and promote items such as marijuana candies, oils, sodas, elixirs, and other products. And in Colorado and in other legal states, the effects have been negative, although it's too early to say what the final verdict is, and no one is saying that the sky is falling. We do know that emergency room hospital admissions are up, expulsions in schools is up, school citations are up, and driving while intoxicated violations, as well as fatal car crash victims testing positive for THC are also up. In fact, Colorado is now, for the first time, the #1 state in the United States for first-time marijuana use. We also know that these industries target the poor and disenfranchised, and we can expect the marijuana industry to do the same. Investigations by newspapers and other independent organizations have found that marijuana stores are often located in the most vulnerable sectors of society. And now we have seen, similar to alcohol, that marijuana stores are located in poorer communities of color. We've also seen arrests go up among young African American and Hispanic youth. Now, we are very concerned about these arrests, but these arrests happened post-legalization in Colorado. Now, if we oppose legalization, it does not mean we want to saddle people with criminal records or go to an extreme incarceration policy for cannabis. We are not calling for mass imprisonment. In fact, we're calling for the opposite. We want to emphasize prevention, early intervention, treatment, and recovery. But to deny the addictive potential of cannabis or the negative mental health effects is to deny the overwhelming scientific evidence available today. And our experience tells us we should not welcome with open arms a new industry like big tobacco, which will focus on commercializing and increasing the use of a drug far more potent today than it has ever been. We worry about the international cannabis industry leveraging bilateral and multilateral investment treaties to challenge public health regulations across the globe, as the tobacco industry has done and as the alcohol industry has done. These legal companies have pursued an outsized impact on developing countries and are resolved through secretive international arbitrations rather than in domestic courts. We therefore request that the INCB emphasize the 3 international drug conventions and discuss how the use of cannabis for non-medical purposes is not a solution to existing controls and challenges with those controls, nor is legalization a way to promote alternatives to incarceration of drug users. We in the civil society right now, especially in the United States, are being overrun by an industry spending millions of dollars on private special interests to manipulate regulations and pass the laws that make them rich. We would like the INCB to remind member states of their obligations, as you have been, for the 3 drug control conventions and the action plan on drugs, in order to implement effective prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation measures. We know that the legalization of marijuana or any drug is not allowed under current conventions, and if the international conventions are to have any kind of stature, these laws must be enforced. Countries should not be able to legalize drugs without consequence if our conventions are to have meaning and credibility. We need a health-based response to the increase of high-potent cannabis use happening all over, especially the developed world. And we especially need to call out this global cannabis industry, which threatens the public health and public safety of all around the globe. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope you have a very productive meeting.